Welcome to Collegial Conversations with Diana Clark, the professional webinar series that offers clinical and personal perspectives on issues that are common, but often not talked about. Here is today's Collegial Conversation.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining a Collegial Conversation with Diana Clark. Today, joining Diana is Tammy Pozerycki. Tammy is the founder and owner of Alternatives in Alzheimer's Care, a company dedicated to improving the quality of life for people with dementia. And today, Diana and Tammy are going to discuss misconceptions around dementia and also touch on what the reversible and non-reversible causes of dementia are. So I'm going to pass the conversation now on over to Diana.
Thank you, Laura, and welcome, Tammy.
Thank you, Diana.
I have had the pleasure of having a training facilitated by Tammy, so I have enough information to start a conversation without being anywhere near informative. So I'm going to pummel you with questions, Tammy, and I hope that you can rally with me. All right.
Absolutely.
So one of the first things I learned in that training is that dementia is not a diagnosis. So
Correct.
can you stretch that out and tell us why it's not a diagnosis? Because you hear it thrown around so easily, diagnosed with dementia. Yeah.
I even hear physicians say it, and really, dementia is an acquired syndrome of symptoms. And so when we think dementia, most of us think memory loss, for one, confusion, getting lost, all the things, right? But those are symptoms coming from something causing dementia.
Okay. So what are the common forms of cognitive decline that we would diagnose as dementia or
Yeah. So right now they have something called mild cognitive impairment. And that's sort of the new diagnosis that doctors are using to describe this early, people are still working, they're still driving, but there's something going on in terms of dementia. And we don't know what's causing it. So we'll just tag on MCI, mild cognitive impairment. It really needs to be looked at, the cause, and the most common cause is the neurocognitive disorder Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's is the one that everybody thinks of. And so often I get the question, well, what's the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's? And I I try to explain it like this. So if you have diabetes, your pancreas is not working. If you have Alzheimer's, your brain is not working. And the brain, it's a brain disease, and the Alzheimer's is causing the dementia. And there are many, many forms of dementia disease.
that's interesting to know. So Alzheimer's is just one kind of dementia. I think also people assume that when somebody is experiencing symptoms of dementia, that it's automatically Alzheimer's. What are some other causes of what you're calling mild cognitive MCD? Is that right?
MCI,
Yep.
mild
Yep.
cognitive impairment. And there are other causes. So when I say neurocognitive disorder, those are your diseases. They're fatal, they're progressive, such like Alzheimer's disease, vascular disease, frontotemporal lobe dementia. But the other things that can look like a neurocognitive disease and might be treatable are things like untreated clinical depression, lack of B12, vitamin deficiency, malnutrition, side effect of medication. Um, it could be normal pressure hydrocephalus, which is something that, if caught early enough, can be uh, actually reversed. So if we look at trying to say, well, there's hope there, right? Because so many people don't want to go first of all, don't want to admit that there's symptoms there. And second, they don't want to go to the doctor, and they don't want to hear that they have a neurocognitive disease process. So we need to get them past that denial phase but there's hope. There's hope. It could just be untreated depression, because I have met people who have been tested and they've been found to have B12 vitamin deficiency. That's fixable.
Totally. So, how is mild cognitive impairment different from what I experience losing my keys every single day?
So mild cognitive impairment is going to start to disrupt your daily functioning. And although someone can still be working or driving, there's little signs, little symptoms that the family, people at work start to notice. Normal aging, there are even doctors who believe that dementia is part of normal aging and you're just getting old. And that's not the case. Oftentimes, what will happen with someone with a true neurocognitive disorder like Alzheimer's, they will lose their way and they will misplace their keys. But the one thing they're unable to do is sort of backtrack, retrace their steps. So if you misplace your keys, you say, okay, I had my keys in the car, I made it up to the kitchen, I was putting groceries away. Where did they go between there and here? Where someone with dementia has no idea where the keys are and sometimes may not know what the keys are for. So, for example, my grandmother who suffered with Alzheimer's disease, my grandfather was looking for the milk and the milk was in the cabinet spoiling because that's where she put the milk, So it's a much slower progression over time. Some people get concerned about memory as they age. And I say just check with your physician, get checked out because it could be stress.
Totally.
Stress actually can look somewhat like dementia, believe it or not.
What about grieving? I've noticed grieving can cause symptoms of appearing like cognitive decline.
I'm so glad you brought that up because I have had couples, husband says to me, I think I'm getting Alzheimer's. And what in fact is going on is that he's depressed, he's grieving the loss of his wife, and it appears like he has dementia. Those symptoms of dementia, when in fact he needs to go through the grieving process. So you're very right about that.
Yeah. So, if somebody called you up and just said, my mother, has a cardiac condition, but I'm noticing her loss of words and I'm noticing her misplacing ideas and misplacing memories out of order, things like that. What would be for our listeners? What would be the first things you would do?
So the first step would be the physician, the primary care physician. Um, and the reason I say that is because there's a lot of things that need to be ruled out. And the physician can now check blood, do lab work, check vitals. Is she getting enough oxygen? That alone will cause dementia symptoms. And really kind of ruling out basic medical causes. And then you want to get a referral to a neurologist, or they have disorder diagnostic clinics where you can go to get worked up. And what does that entail? That entails It might entail an MRI or CAT scan or PET scan of the brain. It entails cognitive testing. So someone would be the one using a form, asking the questions, and giving that person a score as a baseline. And that's to help know in the future, 6 months down the road, are they progressing? So often I've had someone with the concern of dementia. They go to the physician. The physician says, yeah, it's mild cognitive impairment. It's dementia. I'm going to prescribe you Aricept, which is a medication for earlier in the disease process. And I'll see you in 6 months to a year. We'll see how things go. And that is such a disservice to the patient because we never want to add medication for that person for something that serious, for not having a really good workup where nothing else is explaining the symptoms.
Agreed. Agreed. I think the state of medical care is diagnose and prescribe at this point. What would you recommend for families who have recently received information that their loved one of some form has a diagnosis of a progressive brain disorder that is going to impact the relationship over the long run? What do you recommend to those family members?
I usually will say the best thing to do is to get educated, first of all. Get educated about the diagnosis. What does it mean? What does the progression look like? Now, the issue too is that not one person progresses the same. So you can have two 85-year-old women diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and they're going to look completely different. But in terms of getting through that understanding of what is the disease, and knowing that there is so much more life left and really putting it in perspective. It's a devastating diagnosis in the sense that the family will experience grief over a very long period of time because it's so slow, usually depending upon the specific diagnosis. So it's get educated and surround yourself with support. I see too many people isolating, withdrawing from engagement, and limiting contact with friends and family and not telling anybody. They keep it like this big secret. And the best thing to do is talk about it and educate people and say, you know what? So, for example, if my partner was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, I'd be like, let's tell people, let's educate people on how it needs to be.
Stigma.
And that's the issue, Diana. That's the whole issue is stigma. I think mental health in general is stigmatized, and it's unfortunate because we will talk about diabetes. We will talk about cancer.
We will now talk about cancer. When I was
Right.
little, that wasn't true either.
That's right. So I say surround yourself with support. I've always educated folks to go to the Alzheimer's Association. They provide free education and free support and free care consultation and support groups. I think support groups are huge, because you find connection, you find that you're not alone, that other people are dealing with it. So I guess that would be my, and also if they're struggling personally, is get therapy. Go to a therapist and talk to the therapist about it.
Because a spouse's cognitive decline can impact your own cognition, right?
100%.
So what about the kids who are squabbling around who's taking better care of mom or dad?
I think in my long career, I've met one family where all of the children were on the same page, could agree, and they all had their jobs. I think the height of family dysfunction appears its ugly head when we talk about caring for a person with dementia. And it's sad to say, but you know, families have their issues. Families, and when you put a crisis in the middle of that, it's like a ticking time bomb, right? And it
It's
always seems,
gasoline on a fire that has been.
yes. And you can have four other siblings, and one seems to be taking on the entire burden of care. Um, so it definitely, I mean, when my career was such that I had an adult day program, I met with families all the time and really just tried to mediate the the responsibilities. And I recommend family counseling, family mediation, getting all the ducks in the row. There's a lot of legal issues. There's a lot of financial issues.
Right. I agree. And I like the idea of what you described as where the kids actually knew what their jobs were. So what kind of jobs are there for family members of those struggling with a cognitive impairment?
One of the things that I think is so important and why I always encourage education is because they have to learn how to communicate with their loved one and learn things like fiblets. We talked about,
Oh,
we
I've
talked
been
about
using that
right.
training.
And so when I speak of jobs, we want to encourage the person with dementia to do for themselves for as long as possible. We never want to take over any type of functioning for that individual until we clearly see that they are struggling with it. So that when we find that they are struggling with it, we reach out and we say, okay, mom is not paying bills, creditors are coming after her. And you know what? My brother Paul is really good at finances. So we're going to give Paul, talk with him and ask him, would you mind taking up the responsibility for paying mom's bills? And then we have Joan, who has 3 kids under the age of 16, 15. She's got a full-time job and she's working a part-time job, and her husband's traveling for work. We're gonna lighten up the load for Joan because Joan is overwhelmed by her own life stressors and demands. Um, I might hire a an aging life care professional, better known as a geriatric care manager, because I'm an only child and I can't handle all of this. So I need someone professional who's going to come in and take on some of this burden. Um, One of the families might want to be the one to pick up the medication and set them up for success for their mom to take that medication. Make sure there's no food going bad. Make sure that that individual can actually use the stove without any risk of burning themselves. So there's all these jobs that can the person do their own hygiene? Well, maybe it's time that we look into getting a home care agency in.
Right.
So there's so much management that's
Right.
involved for the duration of their journey.
And, I note in families that I work with, favored child status becomes, you need to take care of mom because she'll listen to you. And then
It's very interesting because I find that you have to find that one, right? It's either the one child, it could be the doctor, It could be the best friend. It could be the brother. To find the influential person, because it is tough. If you have an older adult who has dementia, they don't want to listen to their kids. They don't want one of their kids telling them they have to hire help in the home or they can't live in the home independently anymore. That's when professionals need to be called in.
And so then you get to throw the professional under the tires and say,
Yes.
they said you can't live in the home anymore.
100%.
Have to listen to the professionals.
It's like when I have recommended driving, when you have someone with dementia who's still driving and shouldn't be, they make these driving fitness tests. Like there's various hospitals that do the driving fitness test. And I have said, ask your doctor for a doctor's order or prescription that it's required. You didn't make the decision.
Yeah.
Your doctor was, and I always say, make the RMV the bad guy. Who cares?
I don't have any intention of taking on the heat if I don't have to.
Right. And you don't want to, because the person that they are closest to is usually the one that gets the brunt of the emotional angst. And it's because they feel secure with that person. I know he's not going anywhere. And then the other bit of advice to all this is to try not to take things personally. There's this saying that I say to people who are taking it personally, that I say, they're not trying to give you a hard time. They're having a hard time.
It's really important to remember that all the way around when we're dealing with mental health issues and brain health.
Yeah.
Taking things personally makes it about us.
Well, and I also speak to, when I'm training healthcare professionals, I also point out the fact that try and not be judgmental. So for example, I had a woman coming to my day program and the daughter was dedicated, but in certain circumstances, we'd hear her be not so nice. And during a family meeting, I learned what a horrific childhood they had growing up with this woman. And it's like, my goodness, you guys are caring for her when she may not even deserve it. So it's like, you just got to kind of just leave judgments out of it. Just try to really guide the family as best as possible through this journey. And we say, set up the village of support, because you need a village that helps with one person who has Alzheimer's.
Yeah, that makes sense. Is there anything else that you would like to say for our audience today? We have just concluded our
I don't think so. All I could say is, if you don't have the answer, find it out. Call the Alzheimer's Association. There's so much support out there. Don't try to go it alone. It won't work out. It's not long term.
That's a great piece of advice for all of us. And I also loved what you said. Let's talk about it. Let's beat stigma. And the only way we beat stigma is by talking.
100%. Thank you so much, Diana. This is great.
It was fun. I appreciate it.
Thank you for joining this webinar. Tune in to more webinars and sign up for our newsletter at o'connorpg.com.